This is a hearing where there are so many topics to raise, and we don't have enough time to do it all, but let me just focus on a few quickly. One is the drug crisis, and it was referenced earlier. We have an opioid epidemic, as everybody knows. What people perhaps don't know is the role that fentanyl has played. 4,000% increase in fentanyl overdose deaths in my home state in the last 5 years alone. Now the #1 killer in America, in Ohio. Fentanyl 50 times more powerful than heroin, relatively inexpensive, can be made synthetically, therefore sort of a boundless supply. Most of it's coming from China. Most of it's coming through the mail system, I'm told by your experts, Secretary Nielsen, and also from the DEA and other law enforcement folks. Question is, what are we going to do about it? The STOP Act has now passed the House and Senate. We expect the President to sign it next week. It helps in telling the post office you have to finally actually screen these packages. I guess I'm looking for a couple of things. One is a commitment by you, Madam Secretary, and I know you have been with us on this issue for the last few years as we've tried to get this through. Despite resistance from the post office, you have been saying that your Customs and Border Protection people need these tools to be able to identify packages, the needle in the haystack that Director Travers talked about. Will you commit today to rapidly implement that legislation, working with the post office to be sure we don't continue to have people who are dying from this disease who don't have to die because we are just allowing this flow of fentanyl to come into our country through our own postal service?
Absolutely, and I want to thank you for your leadership. It's greatly appreciated. You've worked with us very closely to get that STOP Act done. So between that and the Interdict Act, which this committee was also very helpful in getting across the goal line, yes, absolutely, we will work with the post office immediately.
What more do you need to be able to stop the fentanyl from flowing into this poison coming into our neighborhoods?
So what we're working on now, actually, somewhat with my partners to the left, what we're trying to do is target the networks and the smuggling areas abroad. So before it ever comes here through the mail, we are working with foreign countries. We're working with Interpol, Europol. We have a lot of bilateral agreements. Whenever I meet with our allies, I talk to them about this. But the idea is to have a regional approach and to dismantle the smuggling networks from the top down.
My sense is that cocaine production is increasing fairly dramatically in Colombia right now. Of course, coming into Venezuela, where much of that country, I think, is now in the hands of narco-traffickers, essentially. Coming up through Mexico, crystal meth, of course, coming from Mexico, continues to increase numbers in the last few years. So it's not just opioids. But I will say with regard to fentanyl, you tell me, it's primarily China, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's
You talk about going to the source of the problem. Why is it that there are literally thousands, I'm told, of chemical companies in China producing this stuff that is killing American citizens, and by the way, leaking into the Chinese communities as well, I'm sure, and why haven't we been able to do more about that?
So we have a dialogue with the Chinese, the judicial dialogue. DOJ leads that along with State Department, but that is top of the agenda, is to work with them and get much more aggressive commitments than we've ever had before. But yes, it's coming from China. We need to do more. As you know, all of our canines have now been imprinted with fentanyl, so we work at the express consignment locations and the international mail facilities. So we'll continue to do our part, but then we'll expand it to work with our other partners.
Well, thank you. I'm joined by Senator Carper, Senator Johnson, Senator Carper, Senator McCaskill, and I have spent a lot of time on this issue, and we want to be sure that our legislative initiatives are being implemented rapidly before more people die. On the issue of cyber attacks, you talked a little about these malign actors who are causing over $100 billion of damage to our economy already. You talked about your resiliency strategy. Recently, Senator Hassan and I introduced legislation that this committee has reported out on these cyber response teams, trying to both authorize what you're already doing and expand those. We think this would also go a long way toward cementing your department as the lead on dealing with cyber attacks on the public sector. I guess my question to you is, you talked about resiliency. What more can we do to avoid the cyber attacks on the public sector?
Well, first, I do want to thank you for that bit of legislation. I know our teams are working on the technical assistance, but we thank you for that. The hunt and incident response teams that DHS has to deploy are a very, very important part of the puzzle. As you know, we work on the full spectrum from awareness through to prevention and protection through to mitigation response. But yes, so we thank you for that. In terms of what more is needed, we don't need any additional authorities at this time. What we have announced is the creation of the National Risk Management Center And through that, by bringing in the private sector, with our public partners, what we hope to do is identify those essential functions and systemic risk that would result in cascading consequences should they be attacked. So we're moving away from an asset-based approach to essential functions. We want to keep the lights on. We want to keep communications going. We want to keep the provision of health care available. So through that look at systemic risk, we will increase our partnerships and be able to really focus on what's most important.
Yeah, well, obviously, as all three of you said, this is a crisis, and it's getting worse, not better, and there are state actors involved as well as individual hackers. The state actors, by the way, tend to line up exactly with our adversaries, don't they, Secretary Wray? Director Wray?
Absolutely, and we have had a number of significant cyber investigations that have resulted in charges involving China, involving Russia, involving Iran, involving North Korea even. We just, I think it was just a few weeks ago, indicted a guy who was part of a North Korean front company that, on behalf of the North Korean government, was responsible for the WannaCry ransomware attack, the Sony Pictures intrusion, and the Bank of Bangladesh, tens of $million heist. So it's all four of our adversaries are active in this space.
So this is sort of the new hybrid warfare, and obviously there's a lot more we can do. Let me just ask you a question to all three of you, but primarily perhaps to you, Secretary Nielsen. We have an issue right now with privacy concerns online, so a lot of social media companies have a lot of information from the people we all represent. I think unwittingly a lot of people give up their private information to these social media companies. So we talk about the concern in the financial sector, we talk about the concern in the energy sector, the healthcare sector from cyber attacks. We don't often talk about the fact that there's so much private information out there that is on the web, is available to telemarketing companies, certainly, and I'm hearing more and more from my constituents about it. Are you concerned about that as well? And what kind of protections do these companies have? These treasure troves of private information are out there. Are they properly protected?
Let me start enforcing 7 minutes now. If you have a quick response, that's great. Otherwise, take it for the record.
Okay, it's probably somewhere between us, but really quickly, just to add to what you're describing, we also are very worried about the availability and integrity of information. So all that private information online, if there's a cyber intrusion, it can be altered or it can be frozen through ransomware. So we're looking at all three of the attacks on private information. Yes, that is a threat.